Haunting of Blackwood Manor. Chapter 1. The Arrival. It was a dark and stormy night when John Anderson arrived at Blackwood Manor. The old Gothic mansion stood tall at the edge of the small English village, shrouded in mystery and tales of haunting. John, an American writer, had come to England seeking inspiration for his next novel. He had heard rumors of Blackwood Manor, a place where no one dared to stay for more than a night. As his taxi drove away, leaving him alone in the pouring rain, John felt a chill run down his spine. The manor's towering silhouette was imposing, with its sharp spires and ivy-covered walls. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the sinister architecture for a brief moment before darkness reclaimed it. John hesitated before pushing open the creaking iron gate. The path to the front door was overgrown with weeds, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. He could feel the weight of the manor's history pressing down on him as he approached the heavy wooden door. Taking a deep breath, he knocked 3 times. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a dimly lit foyer. The interior was just as foreboding as the exterior. Dusty portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, and cobwebs hung from the high ceiling. A massive chandelier, its crystals dulled with age, cast eerie shadows across the room. "Hello?" John called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. No response. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a thud. The sound reverberated through the manor, as if the house itself was waking from a long slumber. Chapter 2. The Whispering Walls. John set his bags down and began to explore the manor. Each room he entered seemed more unsettling than the last. The drawing room, with its faded wallpaper and cracked mirror, felt as though it hadn't seen a guest in decades. The dining room, with its long, dusty table, still had the remnants of a forgotten feast. Rotten food and broken china left to decay. As he walked through the house, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and every creak of the floorboards made him jump. He tried to reassure himself that it was just his imagination, but the oppressive silence of the manor did little to calm his nerves. It wasn't until he reached the library that he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft that he almost didn't catch it. He froze, straining to hear more. The whisper came again, this time more distinct. "Leave, now." John's heart pounded in his chest. He looked around the room, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. He took a step back, his mind racing. Was someone trying to scare him, or was there something more sinister at play? John's heart pounded in his chest. He looked around the room, but there was no one there. The whisper seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. He took a step back, his mind racing. Was someone trying to scare him, or was there something more sinister at play? Ignoring the voice, John continued his exploration, determined to uncover the secrets of Blackwood Manor. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing hour. Chapter 3. The ghostly encounters that night. As John lay in the old creaky bed, he couldn't sleep. The rain had subsided, but the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The manor felt alive, as if it were breathing around him. He tossed and turned, trying to ignore the strange noises that echoed through the halls. Suddenly, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He bolted upright, his eyes wide with fear. The room was dark, but he could make out a shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed. His heart raced as the figure slowly moved closer, its form becoming more defined. A woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her face obscured by a veil of dark hair. Who are you?" John stammered. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a bony hand and pointed towards the door. John hesitated, fear rooting him to the spot, but the ghostly woman's presence was overpowering. He had no choice but to follow. The ghost led him through the dark corridors of the manor, past rooms that seemed to change and shift as they walked. The walls themselves seemed to close in on him, the whispers growing louder until they became a cacophony of voices, all urging him to leave. But the woman led him deeper into the heart of the manor, to a room he hadn't seen before. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty chamber. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its surface cracked and smeared with grime. John stepped closer, compelled by an unseen force. As he gazed into the mirror, the reflection twisted and warped. Instead of his own face, he he saw the ghostly woman staring back at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and pain. Before he could react, the woman reached through the mirror, her cold hand gripping his wrist. John gasped as he felt himself being pulled into the glass, the world around him dissolving into darkness. Chapter 4: The Unveiling. John awoke to find himself in a different part of the manor, one that was unfamiliar and yet disturbingly familiar. The walls were lined with old portraits, each one depicting a different member of the Blackwood family. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved, their expressions growing more malevolent with each step. He realized that he was no longer in the real world, but trapped within the mirror's reflection. A twisted version of Blackwood Manor, where the spirits of the past still lingered. The ghostly woman was nowhere to be seen, but her presence was all around him. As he wandered through the distorted halls, John began to piece together the history of the manor. The Blackwood family had been cursed, doomed to haunt the manor for eternity after a series of tragic events. It all began with the original owner, Lord Henry Blackwood, who had dabbled in dark magic in a desperate attempt to save his dying wife. But his ritual had gone horribly wrong. Instead of saving her, he had condemned her soul to eternal torment. In his madness, Lord Blackwood had taken his own life, but the curse had already taken hold, binding the souls of the entire family to the manor. John knew that if he didn't find a way out, he would suffer the same fate. Chapter 5: The Final Confrontation. Determined to escape, John searched for a way to break the curse. He discovered an old journal belonging to Lord Blackwood, hidden in a secret compartment in the library. The journal detailed the ritual and the steps to reverse it, but it required a sacrifice. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. To break the curse, he would have to offer up his own soul. It was a horrifying choice: remain trapped in the mirror world forever, or sacrifice himself to free the spirits of Blackwood Manor. As he stood before the cursed mirror once more, John could feel the presence of the ghostly woman behind him. Her sorrowful eyes met his in the reflection, and he understood that she had been leading him to this moment all along. With a heavy heart, John whispered the incantation from the journal. The room began to shake, and the mirror's surface rippled like water. The ghostly woman reached out to him, her touch cold but gentle. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. John closed his eyes, accepting his fate. As the ritual reached its climax, he felt his soul being pulled from his body, merging with the mirror. The last thing he saw was the woman's face, her expression finally at peace. Epilogue: The Legacy of Blackwood Manor. Years later, Blackwood Manor still stands at the edge of the village, a place of mystery and fear. But the whispers have ceased, and the spirits no longer haunt its halls. The curse has been broken, thanks to the sacrifice of one brave soul. John Anderson's disappearance remains unsolved, but those who visit the manor claim to see a new portrait hanging on the wall. An American man with a kind smile, forever watching over the place he once sought to escape. The villagers say that if you listen closely, you can still hear his voice, whispering words of warning to those who dare enter Blackwood Manor. For it is a place where the past never truly dies, and the echoes of its haunted history continue to resonate through the ages. Like and subscribe. The Forgotten Abyss, Chapter 1, The Letter. A cold drizzle pattered against the windows of Samuel Granger's London flat as he sifted through his morning mail. Bills, advertisements, and the usual mundane correspondence piled up until he reached a peculiar, weathered envelope. The parchment was yellowed with age, and the ink used to write his name was faded, yet unmistakably clear. Samuel Granger-esque. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but what caught his attention was the sender's address, an ancient manor located on the cliffs of Cornwall, known as Thornhaven. Thornhaven had been abandoned for decades, shrouded in rumors of disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and dark rituals. It was a place that locals refused to discuss openly, claiming it was cursed, a remnant of a time best forgotten. With a sense of unease, Samuel opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of parchment, the edges frayed, with a simple yet chilling message. Return to Thornhaven. The sins of the past demand reckoning. There was no signature, no further explanation, just the command. Samuel's heart raced as memories he had long buried resurfaced, memories of his childhood spent in that cursed manor, of his parents who vanished without a trace when he was but a boy. Thornhaven had taken them, or so he'd always believed, though no one ever spoke of what truly happened. Against his better judgment, Samuel felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to return to the place he had sworn to forget. He had to confront the darkness that lingered there and uncover the truth about his parents' fate. Chapter 2: The Journey to Thornhaven. The journey to Cornwall was long and bleak, the skies darkening with heavy clouds as the train rumbled towards its destination. Samuel stared out the window, his reflection a ghostly image against the dreary landscape. His mind was plagued with questions. Who had sent the letter? What did they want from him? And why now, after all these years? As the train neared Thornhaven, the air grew colder, more oppressive, as if the land itself was tainted by the manor's cursed history. When Samuel finally arrived at the small village near the cliffs, he was met with suspicious glances and whispered conversations. The villagers knew where he was headed, and they wanted no part of it. He hired a carriage to take him the rest of the way, the driver a silent, grizzled man who refused to look Samuel in the eye. The road to Thornhaven was treacherous, winding through fog-laden forests and rocky hills. The manor loomed in the distance, its crumbling towers barely visible through the mist. When they arrived, the driver hastily dropped Samuel off at the gate and left without a word. Samuel was now alone, standing before the iron gates of Thornhaven, which creaked open as if welcoming him into its dark embrace. Chapter 3: The Abyss Awakens. Thornhaven was just as Samuel remembered, an imposing structure of stone and decay, its windows shattered and its walls covered in ivy. The front door was ajar, as if expecting him. Inside, the manor was a labyrinth of shadow and rot, the air thick with the smell of mold and something far more sinister. As Samuel ventured deeper into the manor, the walls seemed to close in on him, and the shadows grew darker, more alive. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, some glowing faintly in the darkness. He could feel a presence, something ancient and malevolent, that watched him from the corners of the room, waiting. In the grand hall, he found a large, ornate mirror, its surface marred by cracks that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. The mirror had been in his family for generations, rumored to be a gateway to another realm, a place where the dead lingered and ancient evils slumbered. Samuel's reflection appeared in the mirror, but something was wrong. His reflection moved of its own accord, its eyes filled with hatred and malice. It smiled, a twisted grin that chilled Samuel to the bone. "You should never have returned," the reflection whispered, its voice echoing in Samuel's mind. "They are waiting for you, in the abyss." Before Samuel could react, the mirror shattered and the room plunged into darkness. He felt a cold hand grip his shoulder, and the ground beneath him gave way. Samuel screamed as he was pulled into the abyss, the world around him dissolving into shadows and despair. Chapter 4: The Descent. Samuel awoke to find himself in a vast, cavernous chamber, lit by a sickly, greenish light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground was littered with bones and remnants of the past. He was no longer in Thornhaven, but in a place far older and far more terrifying. A place where time had no meaning, and the dead never rested. The abyss was a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, each one filled with the echoes of the damned and the whispers of forgotten gods. As he wandered through the abyss, Samuel encountered visions of his past, his parents, their faces twisted in agony, their voices calling out to him for help. He saw other lost souls, trapped in eternal torment, their bodies mangled and deformed by the horrors they had endured. The walls of the abyss were alive, pulsating with dark energy, and the very air seemed to sap the life from Samuel's body. But he pressed on, driven by a desperate need to find the source of the curse that had claimed his family and so many others. At the heart of the abyss, he found it. A massive, pulsating mass of darkness, an ancient entity that had slumbered beneath Thornhaven for eons. It was the source of the curse, the true master of the manor, and it had been waiting for him. Chapter 5: The Sacrifice. The entity spoke to Samuel, its voice a cacophony of whispers and screams. It revealed the truth about Thornhaven, that the manor had been built atop the remnants of an ancient temple dedicated to a forgotten god, a god that demanded sacrifices in exchange for power and immortality. His ancestors had made a pact with the entity, offering their souls to keep it dormant. But over the centuries, the sacrifices had ceased, and the entity had grown restless. It had used its power to curse the manor, trapping the souls of those who had lived there and feeding off their torment. Samuel realized that he was the last of his bloodline. The final sacrifice needed to complete the ritual and seal the entity away forever. But he also knew that doing so would mean condemning his own soul to eternal suffering. The entity offered him a choice: sacrifice himself and save the world from its wrath, or refuse and unleash unspeakable horrors upon the world. The weight of the decision was crushing, but Samuel knew what he had to do. With a heavy heart, he began the ritual, reciting the ancient words that had been passed down through his family. The ground trembled, and the walls of the abyss began to close in. The entity's laughter echoed in his mind as it fed on his fear, but Samuel remained resolute. As the ritual neared its end, Samuel felt his soul being torn from his body, merging with the darkness. The pain was unbearable, but he held on, knowing that his sacrifice would save countless lives. In his final moments, Samuel saw the faces of his parents, their expressions no longer twisted in agony but peaceful, finally free from the curse. He smiled, knowing that he had done the right thing. And then everything went black. Epilogue: The Silent Curse. Thornhaven Manor still stands on the cliffs of Cornwall, its dark history forgotten by most. The villagers speak of a strange event that occurred years ago, a sudden violent storm that lasted for days, followed by an eerie silence that has persisted ever since. No one dares to approach the manor, and those who do claim to feel an overwhelming sense of dread and despair. The air around Thornhaven is thick with an unnatural cold, and strange symbols can still be seen etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. But the whispers have ceased, and the shadows no longer move on their own. The curse has been broken, and the entity that once dwelled beneath the manor has been sealed away, never to rise again. Or so they believe. For in the depths of the abyss, a faint heartbeat can still be heard, a reminder that some evils can never truly be vanquished, only forgotten, until they are remembered once more. Like and subscribe.